I of Zeus now. I stood in the doorway of my own home that Thursday afternoon, staring at her car in the driveway and wishing I'd been wrong. My hand trembled around the key, so I slid it into my pocket, determined not to make a single sound. Something inside me, some last shred of hope, wanted to turn around and leave, but I'd come this far. It was too late to pretend. I stepped inside. The foyer felt colder than usual, the silence strangely heavy. Our living room opened to the left, the kitchen to the right, but my focus was straight ahead, up the short staircase where the bedroom was. I'd found that door cracked open, as if mocking me. The smell in the hallway carried hints of sweat and perfume, the mix of laundry detergent and some intrusive masculine cologne. I swallowed, but my throat was dry. There was no turning back. I could hear them. It wasn't loud, but it was there. Muffled laughter. His voice, low and teasing. Her voice breathy, uncertain. I wasn't supposed to be home. She worked a design job that normally lasted until 5, and I ran the regional office of a trading company, usually stuck in the city until late. But I'd left mid-shift, telling my team I had personal business. And now I was halfway up the stairs, each step echoing in my head, dreading what I'd see. I hesitated right outside our bedroom. I heard the rustle of sheets, a soft moan. No illusions remained. She was with him. She was giving him the part of herself I thought belonged to me. Then they laughed again. That sound was like a knife. I'd expected I would rage or break something, but a strange numbness kept me frozen, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I pushed the door open, almost hoping to see it for myself, but the bed was empty. Empty and neatly made, corners tucked in as if it had never been touched. Yet the faint trace of disarray hovered around the pillows, and the tang in the air was unmistakable. The window was open, letting a breeze flow in, as though they tried to clear out the smell of betrayal. I heard her footsteps on the stairs heading down. I leaned against the wall, pressing my forehead to the cool plaster. Her voice drifted up, so casual it made my stomach turn. "You're early," she said. That was it. No explanation, no stammer, no panic. Just a flat statement of fact, as if I were an unwelcome intruder in my own home. I figured I'd come pack a bag. I said, stepping into view, "I need to get away for the weekend." She nodded, not even meeting my eyes. "Sure." I walked past her, down the hall, and she didn't stop me. My skin felt clammy. I felt as if I were watching myself from above, like my soul was floating near the ceiling, watching this silent exchange with a cold detachment. She planned to pretend nothing had happened, that I was too blind or too loyal to suspect. I didn't speak another word. I went downstairs to the basement, my private corner where I kept old files, my collection of vinyl records, random boxes from my parents' old house. There was a cot, a single light bulb. I sat on the cot and inhaled for a long time, willing my heart to slow down. She was upstairs, probably waiting for me to confront her, or maybe she was hurrying him out the back door. I listened. I heard nothing more that day. That night, I read her a dream. Our ritual. Ever since we got married 10 years ago, Terry and I had shared our nighttime thoughts. She liked me to read to her from my notebook of little stories. Over the years, it became a tradition. I'd say, "Close your eyes," and I'd spin some short, fanciful scenario until she dozed off. I gave away a piece of my soul every time, or so I once believed. But that night, I changed the script. I told her a dream about a bathtub. I recounted it slowly, standing by the foot of the bed. You're lying under the water, a rose floating above your chest. The petals are bruised. You're not moving. Bubbles trickle from your parted lips, and I realize you're singing. A lullaby I don't recognize. I reach for you, but you slip deeper. The water is so clear I can see your eyes open, staring at me. I wonder if you can see me in the darkness, or if you're already gone. I said it all in one cold breath, and then I closed the notebook. She lay there, not turning to look at me. She didn't ask what it meant, not that night or any other night. She must have known it was my silent condemnation. I went to the basement again, where I'd set up a temporary arrangement, a thin mattress, a single light. Somehow, that cramped space felt safer than the bed we once shared. I did not sleep well. My mind churned with the knowledge of what I'd heard that day. I felt gutted, hollowed out. The next morning, I took a shower in the upstairs bathroom while she was making coffee, or at least pretending to. She said nothing. I toweled off, dressed for work, and on my way out I spotted her phone sitting on the counter. We used to trust each other enough that we didn't pry into each other's calls, but I'd already started writing down the number that kept appearing on her screen each night. I recognized it now, the same digits, over and over, sometimes during midday. She must have saved it under a fake contact. D. That was all it said on her phone. D. A few days later, I got another call from that same unknown number on the landline, the one we rarely used. This time, I didn't pick up. I let it ring. Then I let it ring the next day too. Always the same hour, always around 8 at night. Terry looked anxious each time, but she tried not to show it. She'd wander into another room or start rummaging in the fridge. And every night, I read her a new dream. One was about a silent field of ice, with her trapped underneath, beating on the frozen surface while I stood above, watching. Another was about a long rope that was more of a noose, and I described the slow tightening around her delicate neck. I left details open to interpretation, but the implication was always clear. She was dying, and I was there. She listened quietly, her hands folded on her lap. Once in a while, I'd notice her breathing quicken, but she never objected. She never accused me of any wrongdoing. She let me unspool these dark tales, as if it were her penance. By the end of the week, I couldn't take the tension anymore. I wanted to destroy something, or maybe let it destroy me. Instead, I planned my next move. A dinner. I told Terry we should invite a few friends. She agreed, probably thinking it would restore some semblance of normalcy. She had no idea I'd also invite him. I used her phone. While she was out running errands, I flipped through her contacts, found the number labeled only as D, and I sent a crisp, courtly message. Dinner at our place next Thursday, 7 p.m. Please come. My husband and I are looking forward to meeting you. I set up the plan with the same calm I used in business meetings. I selected a handful of old friends. People from my college days, some of Terry's design pals, even my coworker from the office. Enough to fill the living room. Enough to create an atmosphere where something big would happen. I wanted her to realize she couldn't keep secrets in front of them all. In the nights leading up to the dinner, the tension in the house was suffocating. We still performed our daily routines. She got up, dressed, left for her design job. I showered, shaved, drove to the office. We pretended everything was the same, but the quiet was sharper than any words. Each evening, I read her a dream. She lay in bed, eyes open, watching me. And I saw the glimmer of guilt, or maybe it was defiance. I couldn't read it clearly, but I knew that a part of her was bracing for something, like a condemned prisoner waiting for the final verdict. When Thursday came, she tried to dress up the house. Fresh flowers on the table, the best dishes polished, even her favorite candle flickering in the living room. I stood near the window, wearing a black suit, arms crossed. She wore a knee-length dress, pale pink with a subtle pattern, flattering her figure without being too overt. She looked tense. Our guests trickled in, exchanging polite greetings. Some brought wine, others brought desserts. One of my old colleagues, a jolly man named Stuart, clasped my shoulder. "Hey, you look a bit pale, buddy. Everything okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "I'm just tired." At 7:20 p.m., I saw him. He arrive. A lean man in a crisp button-up and fitted jeans, hairstyled like he'd stepped off a magazine shoot. Green eyes that flicked around the room. He looked confident, a half-smile on his face, carrying a bottle of wine. He introduced himself to the nearest people as Daniel. My heart pounded, but I forced a calm expression. I approached him. "You must be Daniel." "I'm Michael, her husband." He extended a hand, face carefully neutral. "Pleasure to meet you, Michael." "Likewise," I said. "Thanks for coming." He shot a glance toward Terry, who hovered behind me in the kitchen doorway. She looked stunned, as if she'd hoped to keep him away. I only met her gaze for a second, and the color drained from her cheeks. Dinner was served with polite chatter. People asked how business was, how Terry's design projects were going. Daniel played the role of some vague acquaintance who'd popped by at her invitation. No one suspected. They laughed. They enjoyed the roast chicken, and Terry poured wine with a trembling hand. She tried to keep her composure, but her voice cracked every now and then. I waited. I let them talk, let them ask about my vinyl collection or comment on Terry's new curtains. I nodded, answered in monotone, poured my own glass of wine. All the while, I was waiting for the perfect moment. Finally, when the meal was nearly finished, I glanced at Terry. She offered a smile to one of our guests, but her eyes stayed glued to her plate. I took a small audio recorder from my pocket. I tapped the device against the table. Everyone turned to look. "I'd like to share something," I said. My voice was steady, formal, the way I'd address a jury. "It's just a snippet of sound I found. Memorable." Terry's eyes widened, and Daniel shifted in his seat. One of my friends gave me a puzzled look. I pressed play. Soft static, and then the sound of laughter. A man's husky chuckle, a woman's lighter giggle. I recognized it so vividly that I felt my stomach twist, but I forced my face to remain composed. The recording played for a few seconds, that unmistakable joint laughter. Then I pressed stop. I noticed Terry's hand tremble around her wine glass, a few droplets of red sliding dangerously close to the edge. She tried to put it down, but it rattled against the table. "Why are you playing that, Michael?" she asked, her voice taut. I met her gaze. I wanted them to hear what I heard. Nobody else spoke. Daniel's smile vanished. His knuckles whitened around his fork. The tension in the room soared, and I could practically hear the flicker of the candle behind me. I stood. And now, one final dream. I've been reading Terry these dreams every night. I think it's time our guests hear one. Terry's lips parted, her face gone chalky. Daniel looked down, as if he'd like to sink into his chair and disappear. My chest felt tight, but I continued in that same rigid, measured tone. I opened my notebook. I'd written it that very morning, fueled by the anger that gnawed at me. "The dream starts on a rooftop," I said. "It's nighttime, the sky bruised purple, and there's a single figure standing at the ledge, a woman with golden hair. She's clutching a bundle of roses, petals already falling away. She looks over the edge, sees the shimmering city, hears the roar of traffic far below. She closes her eyes, steps off the ledge, and for a moment it feels like flying. But the wind tears the flowers from her arms. They scatter in the darkness, and she plummets, arms flailing, mouth open in a silent cry. I'm watching from a nearby tower. I make no move to stop it. I let her fall. I shut the notebook with a snap. Silence. The dining room was claustrophobic with tension. A few people shifted uncomfortably, unsure if this was some weird performance art, or if something darker was happening. Daniel cleared his throat, but words failed him. Terry shook her head, tears brimming. She tried to speak, then swallowed them back. Someone at the far end of the table gave a nervous chuckle, perhaps trying to ease the moment, but it only made everything worse. The air felt thick, like a storm about to break. I stared at Terry, and she stared back, her eyes full of guilt, confusion, fear, maybe even anger. I took a step away from the table. "I think that's enough for tonight," I said. "Everyone, thank you for coming." They didn't move. They stared at me, then at Terry, then at Daniel. Realization started to dawn in the way they blinked at each other. The tension was so tangible you could feel it pricking at your skin. I swallowed, feeling the dryness in my mouth. I'll be leaving, I continued, controlling my voice. Just wanted to share my dream. It's over now. I stepped out from behind the chair, pulled my jacket off the back of it, and began walking toward the front door. Terry jumped up, her wine glass toppling, liquid staining the tablecloth. "Michael," she said, voice trembling, tears rolling down her cheeks. I glanced back, briefly, meeting her gaze. In her eyes, I saw the full weight of what she'd done. But I felt no satisfaction. Something in me was already dead. "I'm done," I said just loud enough for everyone to hear. With all of this, I opened the door. The night sky felt huge and cold as I stepped onto the porch. I knew the hush in the dining room behind me was continuing, that nobody dared to speak, that Terry was left to confront her lover, or whatever he was, in the presence of our bewildered friends. Maybe they'd comfort her, or maybe they'd condemn her. I no longer cared. I walked down the path to my car, got in, and put my hands on the steering wheel. For a long moment, I didn't start the engine. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked pale, hollow-eyed. I was a man who had just watched a marriage shatter in front of half a dozen guests. I wanted to cry, but nothing came. I just stared, remembering the times I'd called her by pet names in that very home, the times we'd made love with laughter and tears. None of that existed anymore. I drove aimlessly for a while, ended up pulling into a gas station off the interstate. The overhead lights buzzed. I got out, walked inside, bought a cheap cup of coffee. The clerk barely glanced at me. I must have looked like a ghost, my suit rumpled, my expression vacant. I wondered if I had the strength to keep going, or if I should just vanish somewhere nobody would find me. But I was still an adult with responsibilities, a man who had a job, aging parents down in Florida, a mortgage, a life. I had to be something more than this broken, vengeful shell. In the restroom, I splashed water on my face, stared at my reflection. My hair was disheveled, tie askew. My eyes were red. I tried to straighten up. A memory of Terry's perfume rushed over me, unbidden, and I remembered how she used to stand behind me, press her cheek against my shoulder. That was before the nightly phone calls, before the man named Daniel stepped into our world and devoured it. I dried my face and walked out into the stark neon aisles. The coffee tasted burnt. I finished it anyway, my throat tight. I booked a shabby motel for the night. The walls were thin, the bed creaked, and the air conditioner rattled. But I just needed somewhere to think. My mind wouldn't let go of the image of Terry's face, her trembling hand, the way that final dream must have cut through her. I lay fully dressed on top of the covers. At some point, I dozed off. Morning. A slice of pale light cut across the bed, hitting me in the eyes. I sat up and ran a hand over my face. My suit was wrinkled, and I probably smelled like stale sweat and cheap coffee. A wave of nausea rolled through my stomach as I recalled last night's fiasco. I braced myself, called a local realtor whose number I'd found in the yellow pages, told them I needed a short-term rental for a while. Something small, furnished if possible. I had to get out from Terry's place, my place, once, but not anymore. By noon, I was driving around a bleak part of town, checking out a cramped loft above a closed bakery. It was run down, smelled of flour and old sugar, but the rent was month to month. It would do. I paid the deposit and sat there in the folding chair they called living room furniture, pressing my palm against my eyes. I felt like I wanted to collapse. Instead, I made a list on my phone of what I needed. Clothes, toiletries, maybe a second-hand couch. My life had come to that, starting from scratch because of her betrayal. I noticed my phone had a new message, Terry's name. I stared at it until the screen went dark. Then I forced myself to open it. It read, "Michael, please. We need to talk." I typed, "There's nothing left to say," but I didn't send it. Instead, I locked the phone and tossed it onto the tiny kitchen counter. My chest ached, and my eyes stung. Work helped distract me for a while. I showed up at the office, faced a barrage of curious stares. Maybe rumors had already spread. The colleague who'd attended the dinner was tight-lipped, but I could sense the tension. People knew something had gone terribly wrong. I threw myself into spreadsheets, phone calls, managing shipments. My boss recognized the haunted look in my eyes, but he didn't pry. I ended up staying late, volunteering to take on tasks just to avoid returning to that lonely loft. After a week, I realized I was losing weight. Food tasted like ashes, and I'd skip meals without noticing. Still, no matter how busy I kept myself, the nights refused to show me mercy. I'd lie on that lumpy mattress, staring at the peeling ceiling paint, hearing the hum of traffic outside, remembering every detail. I would think of Terry's body, the warmth that was once mine. I'd remember the faint smell of Daniel's cologne in our bedroom, that short stifled laugh, like a secret shared. Sometimes I would slip into near delirium, imagining her with him. The feel of his hands on her, the taste of her breath in his mouth. I'd jolt awake, body soaked in sweat, heart hammering in my throat, the silent scream inside my chest. 2 weeks after the dinner, I found myself outside the old house again. I'd come to pick up a few more of my possessions, photo albums, clothes I'd left behind, maybe some important paperwork. I felt a mix of dread and anger. The driveway was empty, her car nowhere in sight. I unlocked the door with my key, stepping inside like a burglar. The air smelled stale, as if Terry had been forgetting to open the windows. I walked through the living room. My eyes landed on the table where I'd once pressed that recorder, capturing their laughter. The tablecloth was gone, probably stained beyond repair. Upstairs, our bedroom was neat, the comforter smoothed out. An empty sensation spread through my chest. I opened the closet, grabbed a suitcase, and started filling it with clothes. Suits, shirts, some old t-shirts I'd once worn to mow the lawn. I should have felt a pang of nostalgia, but all I had was a dull headache. I found the old vinyl records in the corner, my father's classic jazz and 70s rock. I stacked them in a box, careful not to damage them. Then I saw a framed photo of Terry and me of the Grand Canyon years ago. We were laughing in the picture, arms around each other. I stared at it for a moment before burying it beneath some clothes. When I came downstairs to load the car, the front door opened. Terry walked in, carrying groceries in a tote bag. She froze when she saw me. Her hair was pinned back, face pale. She looked exhausted, eyes rimmed with red. I didn't speak. I set the box down by my feet. She inhaled slowly. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" I shrugged. "It's still my house, too. I just needed some things." She nodded, her hand squeezing the strap of the tote until her knuckles whitened. I noticed the ring on her left hand. She still wore the wedding band, though I saw her twist it nervously. "Do you want some coffee?" she offered, voice shaking. "No," I said. She exhaled, blinking tears away. "Michael, I'm sorry. You have to believe me. I never wanted it to be like this." I looked at her in silence, letting her words hang in the air. She tried again, voice trembling. "Daniel and I. It just happened. I was lonely. You were never home, always working. I felt like I was disappearing inside these walls. So you found a man to fill that void," I said, as if summarizing a court case. She stared at the floor. "Yes," she said, almost in a whisper. A moment passed. It felt like a decade. I found myself remembering the first time I saw her, the bright college campus, her laugh that bubbled up from her chest. She was so full of life back then. I wondered how we got here, two strangers in a house that no longer felt like home. "I read you those dreams every night," I said, voice low, "hoping you'd realize what you'd done to me. Did you?" She swallowed. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then she nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I did." I looked away, scanning the room. A single lamp, the couch we once fell asleep on watching old movies. The walls felt oppressive. "I won't fight you over it," I said finally. Keep the house if you want. I just want a clean break. She bit her lip. I don't know if I want the house without you. I said nothing. I hoisted the box of vinyl and headed for the door. She followed me, footsteps soft. At the threshold I turned. Don't call me, I said. Don't message me. Sign whatever needs signing for the divorce. I'll do the same. Tears leaked down her cheeks, but I was past the point of feeling pity. The numbness had taken over. I stepped out without looking back. At the loft, I put the box down on the squeaky table. I felt a savage satisfaction in the finality of it. I was leaving behind every dream we'd once shared, every plan for a future together. Maybe I was also leaving behind the man I used to be. I arranged for an attorney, some cheap local lawyer recommended by an acquaintance. We started the paperwork. Meanwhile, Terry tried texting me a few more times, but I didn't respond. I wanted no conversation. She had Daniel now, or maybe she didn't. It didn't matter. All I knew was that my old life had ended. Each day, I carried on in an almost robotic fashion. Wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat. But something inside me was shifting. Perhaps it was the hateful dreams I'd conjured each night, or the memory of the dinner fiasco, or the emptiness I felt at the gas station after I walked out. I'd been broken, but broken things can be reassembled differently, with new edges and angles. There's a strength in realizing you've already lost what you feared losing most. I started going to the gym again, punching the heavy bag until my arms felt like lead. My colleague asked me out for beers once or twice, and I actually said yes. I sat with him in a dim bar, letting cheap whiskey burn my throat. He didn't pester me with details, just let me nurse my bitterness in silence. It was a small mercy. Still, the nights were the worst, especially when I'd think about how love could just vanish like that. For so many years, I'd believed the scariest thing in a relationship was betrayal, but I'd begun to suspect it was something else. Indifference. The slow fade of caring. That's what gutted me most. 2 months passed. The divorce was nearly final. Terry and I had minimal communication, mostly through lawyers. She got the house. I kept my pension and the majority of my savings. A fair split, by legal standards, though nothing about it felt fair. I never saw Daniel again. Part of me hoped he and Terry were happy, just so there was some logic to it all. Another part of me wanted them both to feel the same emptiness I'd felt. But in the end, it didn't really matter how they fared. I had my own path to walk. I visited my parents in Florida. My father was stoic, as always, never quite able to say the words to comfort me. My mother gave me a quiet, worried hug. She saw the grief in my eyes, asked me if I needed anything. I said I was okay. It was only half a lie. My father took me fishing. We stood side by side on an old wooden dock, reeling in catfish we'd toss back. He was a man of few words, but he finally asked, "So it's over?" I nodded. "Yeah, Dad. It's over." He turned away, threw his line out. The tension in his shoulders told me everything he couldn't say out loud. Back in the loft, I packed up my meager belongings once more, feeling a restless urge to move forward. I considered selling the vinyl records, but I couldn't. They were part of me, a memory of better days. Instead, I found a new place, slightly bigger, closer to a local park. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't smell like stale sugar. The day I moved in, I realized I had no bed yet. I laid a sleeping bag on the floor, hooking my phone to a small speaker while I organized the boxes. I played an old jazz record, remembering how it used to fill the living room of the old house with warmth. My chest ached, but I kept going. When I was done, I sat on the bare floor. The walls were a neutral white, unadorned. I was alone, truly alone for the first time since everything happened. I closed my eyes, let out a slow breath, and felt an odd sense of peace. I didn't realize how late it was until I heard my phone buzz. I reached for it, expecting some spam or a message from a coworker, but it was from Terry. I hesitated, staring at the name. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part of me was drawn to the ghost of who she'd once been. I opened it. A single line. "I'm sorry. I hope you find happiness again someday." No sign of Daniel. No mention of how she was. Just a quiet plea, maybe for forgiveness, maybe for closure. I considered replying, but the words wouldn't come. Months went by. The day the divorce was finalized, I left the courthouse feeling unexpectedly hollow. Everything was wrapped up. A neat set of signatures and stamps. "You're free," said the lawyer with a thin smile, as if that was all it took to wash away a decade of marriage. I decided to go for a drive after. Didn't matter where. I ended up at that old lake north of the city, the one I'd loved as a child, where my parents once took me fishing. The sun was low in the sky, painting the water orange and gold. A memory flickered in my mind, me as a kid, knee-deep in the reeds, feeling the dampness of mud on my ankles and the pure joy of summer. I stepped out of the car, walked to the water's edge. The breeze rippled across the surface, carrying the faint tang of algae. I thought of Terry's eyes, wide and tear-filled, and realized I could no longer hate her. Hate demands too much energy. The numbness had turned into something else. Acceptance, perhaps. I still felt the bruise on my soul, but it was healing, slowly. I remembered the dinner table, the tension, the way I had read that final dream. I recalled how everyone stared at me in horror, how Terry's wineglass shook. In the moment, I'd been fueled by a grim satisfaction, punishing her publicly. But now, after time and distance, it all felt so small and tragic. I sank down on a boulder by the lake. A part of me still yearned for the life we could have had if we hadn't let things crumble. Another part recognized that it was gone. Nothing remained but the lessons, harsh ones. Somewhere overhead, a flock of birds flew in formation, heading south. The shape they made in the sky looked like an arrow, pointed to places unknown. I closed my eyes and let the wind brush against my face, feeling the ache in my chest recede to a dull pang. The next few weeks, I tried to settle into a routine that belonged to a man living alone. I woke early, worked out, made coffee, went to the office. On weekends, I'd drive to a little diner near the outskirts of town, reading the paper while sipping a bottomless mug of black coffee. I'd watch older men come in with their wives or children, wonder if they'd faced heartbreak of their own. Maybe everyone eventually does. At the office, responsibilities piled up, but I welcomed them. Meetings, spreadsheets, phone calls. I traveled to a conference in Boston, had a few polite after-hours drinks with colleagues. One night, a woman from accounting asked if I wanted to go for a late dinner. I declined politely. I wasn't ready for any of that. On the drive home, I thought about my father's silence, my mother's worried eyes, the memory of Terry handing me the ring on our wedding day, the ring that was now sitting in a drawer somewhere, a piece of metal that used to symbolize everything I believed in. One night, as I was drifting off, I found myself thinking of those dreams I used to read to Terry, the ones that ended in her death every time. I realized I had no new nightmares to recite. Part of me wanted to write more, to channel my bitterness onto a page. But I couldn't. The impetus was gone, replaced by weariness. I got up, rummaged through a box. I found my old notebook, the one where I'd written those dark tales. I flipped through the pages, reading lines about water, ice, ropes, rooftops, scenes of quiet, ominous ends. My own handwriting looked foreign, scrawled in anger. I tore the pages out, one by one, letting them flutter into the trash. Weeks passed, and I realized I was breathing easier. There were times I'd watch the sun go down without feeling that hollow ache. I still had my regrets, my haunted memories, but they weren't controlling me. I could imagine a future again, albeit a murky one. I never answered Terry's text, nor any that followed. She eventually stopped trying. I assumed she was with Daniel, or maybe not. Perhaps she was just existing in that house alone, the same way I had existed in the loft. I felt a pang whenever I thought about it, but I had nothing left to give her. My final official tie to Terry was the sale of the old house. She decided to move out of state, probably to find a fresh start. She had me sign a few documents. I did so willingly. That place held too many ghosts. I signed the papers at a local notary's office, then stepped outside. The sky was clear, pale blue, the sidewalk bustling with midday foot traffic. I felt an odd sense of release, as if a chain had been cut. A new life was waiting, somewhere, for me to step into it. I walked toward my car, hands in my pockets, gazing at the city around me. Brick buildings, bustling shops, people going about their day. I realized I wanted to be among them, to feel the pulse of life again. Maybe I'd join a meetup group or finally travel to that little cabin by the mountains I'd always dreamed of seeing. I got in the car and just sat for a moment. I thought about that last night at the house, my basement refuge, the stale smell in the air, the knowledge that she was upstairs with him. I remembered how I'd once pressed my ear to the door. The laughter I'd recorded, the same laughter that turned a switch in me. Had I truly wanted revenge? Maybe at the time, yes, but now I realized it had never given me real closure. It only gave me a dark moment of triumph that left my soul emptier than before. All that remained was the quiet aftermath. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine rumbled to life. I remembered the dinner, how the guests stared, how Daniel lost his grin. Terry's trembling hand. My own voice, calm like a judge passing sentence. Maybe I was too harsh, or maybe I wasn't harsh enough. It no longer mattered. I pulled onto the road, merging with midday traffic. I breathed in and out, focusing on the simple act of moving forward. The city streamed by in all its chaotic energy. Cars weaving, pedestrians crossing, lights changing. I just kept going, letting the mundane details fill the silence in my head. Some nights, I still dream about her, but it's different now. In these new dreams, she's not drowning, not falling, not dying. She's just there, looking at me with a pained expression. I wake up feeling a mix of sadness and relief. Because in the end, the scariest thing was never the betrayal itself, but the realization that we'd grown so distant that I barely recognized her. That's what left the real scar. The indifference, the slow fade of connection, until we became strangers under one roof. She sought comfort in another man's arms, and I sought comfort in my own bitterness. Neither of us tried to save what we'd once had, at least not until it was too late. But life goes on. I'm not the same person I was. I have new edges, new fractures that have healed into a different shape. I felt that dark pit in my stomach, the one that threatened to swallow me whole. I know what it's like to stand in the hallway, hearing laughter that tears your soul apart. I'm still here. Maybe that's enough. Weeks turned into months, then half a year. I started meeting new people. Nothing romantic, just small connections here and there. Coworkers at lunch, neighbors at the new apartment complex, folks in line at the grocery store. Each small conversation reminded me that I wasn't alone, that the world didn't revolve around my heartbreak. Sometimes I'd drive out to that quiet lake on a Sunday, sit on a bench, watch the water. I'd let the memory of Terry surface, let the pain swell, and then let it pass. Over time, the pain got smaller. The lake stayed the same. I remember one particular Sunday. The sky was overcast, the water dark. I tossed in a pebble, watched the ripples expand. In that moment, I felt a surge of pity for the man I had been, for his illusions, for the righteous anger he used to conceal this hurt, for the way he tried to punish Terry in a theatrical display. He was desperate, afraid. He thought punishing her in front of the world would make him strong, but it just left him empty. I let out a long breath. A gull cried overhead, diving for a fish. The water shimmered with the movement. I realized how far I'd come since that day. I stepped into my house at an unexpected hour and heard the laughter of a stranger in my bedroom. It's been nearly a year now. I sometimes wonder if Terry ever found what she was looking for. I don't miss her in the way I used to, But a part of me remembers the good times, the gentle way she used to drape her arms around my shoulders. I can't erase all of that, but I no longer let it define me. I still have the vinyl records. Every so often, I'll put one on. An old jazz piece that crackles with nostalgia. I'll sit on my couch, let the music wash over me. And for a moment, I feel the echo of who I was before the betrayal. But now, I'm more aware of who I am. A man who survived the worst heartbreak of his life and found a way to keep going. I suppose that's the only real lesson I can share. Betrayal can break you, or it can force you to reshape yourself. The real horror isn't the cheating. It's the coldness that creeps between two people who once cared. If there's a nightmare that haunts me, it's the memory of her vacant eyes, the silence in her voice when she said, "You're early," as though she barely cared. But I made it through, piece by jagged piece. I'm not sure if that makes me strong or simply numb, but I'm here. I'm moving forward. And if I ever feel that old darkness tugging at my sleeve, I remind myself, I already walked through fire. I already died in that house, in that room, hearing that laughter. Whatever happens next, I'll face it head on. Because once you've seen your worst fears realized, there's a strange freedom in the ashes. I'm no saint. I still have moments of anger, of longing, even of regret. But I'm alive, and my heart still beats, and sometimes that's enough to carry me into the next day. That's life, I guess. Messy, painful, unexpectedly resilient. The man who read those dreams every night to punish the woman he once loved is gone. In his place stands someone else, a bit older, a bit wiser, a bit harder around the edges. But my eyes are open now. That's my story. That's how I died, and how I learned to live again.